The thundering of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Lillian Hayes pushed her chestnut mare to the limit, her heart pounding against her ribs like a war drum. Behind her, the horizon was tinged orange with the setting sun and the distant torchlights of the men who hunted her. Sweat drenched her blouse, the once fine fabric now torn and soiled from days on the run. As she glanced over her shoulder, her mare's front hoof caught in a prairie dog hole, sending both horse and rider tumbling in a cloud of prairie dust. Pain shot through Lillian's body as she hit the ground hard, rolling several feet before coming to rest beside a cluster of sagebrush. The mare whinnied in distress, struggling to rise but favoring her right front leg. Tears welled in Lillian's eyes, not just from the physical pain, but from the crushing realization that her escape was over. Without her horse, she was as good as captured. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her scramble to her feet despite the shooting pain in her ankle. She limped toward a nearby outcropping of rocks, desperate for somewhere to hide, but knowing it was futile. "Whoa there, Ranger!" a deep voice called, not to her, but to his mount. Lillian froze, her back still turned to the approaching rider. She heard the soft thud of boots hitting the ground and the jingle of spurs as he walked toward her. Her fingers clutched the small derringer hidden in the pocket of her skirt, her last defense. "Miss," the voice said, closer now. "You don't have to run anymore." Something in his tone made her turn. He stood about 10 feet away, his tall frame silhouetted against the sunset. He wasn't one of Blackburn's men, she could tell that immediately. He wore simple trail clothes rather than the fancy vests and pins that marked Blackburn's hired guns. His cowboy hat was pulled low, but she could see a kind face framed by dark hair. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse from days of dust and fear. "Name's Isaac Kane," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I've been tracking you since you left Copper Creek, but not for the reasons you might think." "You're not with Blackburn?" she asked, her hand still on her hidden gun. "No, madam. I work for Judge Wilson. I'm supposed to bring you back to testify." Lillian felt her legs weaken. "I can't go back. They'll kill me." Isaac stepped forward, his eyes filled with understanding. "Not while I'm alive, they won't." The year was 1876, and in the wild expanse of Colorado Territory, promises were as plentiful as tumbleweeds, and often just as substantial. But something in Isaac Kane's steady gaze made Lillian want to believe him. "Your mare's injured," he observed, turning to look at the horse who had managed to stand but was clearly in pain. "She's not going to carry you any further tonight." "I can't leave her," Lillian said, limping toward her faithful companion. "We won't," Isaac assured her, "but we need to get you somewhere safe before Blackburn's men find this trail. I've got a camp set up about a mile east of here. We can come back for her in the morning." Lillian hesitated, looking between her injured horse and the stranger offering help. "How do I know I can trust you?" Isaac's expression remained patient. "You don't. But right now, I'm your best chance of staying alive until the trial. After that, you can go wherever you want, and I'll personally make sure you get there safely." Reluctantly, Lillian nodded. After checking on her mare and leaving her with what little water remained in her canteen, she allowed Isaac to help her onto his horse. The pain in her ankle made mounting difficult, and she gasped when his strong hands gripped her waist to lift her into the saddle. "Sorry," he murmured, his touch immediately gentling. He swung up behind her, careful to keep a respectful distance despite the intimate arrangement. As they rode away, Lillian could feel the solid warmth of his chest at her back, and despite everything, a strange feeling of security washed over her. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't running alone. Isaac's camp was well hidden in a grove of cottonwoods beside a small creek. A small fire burned low, sheltered from view by strategically placed rocks. He helped her dismount, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary before he stepped away. "Let me take a look at that ankle," he said after seeing to his horse. Lillian sat on a fallen log, reluctantly extending her injured foot. It's not broken. I can still walk. Maybe so, but a bad sprain can slow you down just as much. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he unlaced her boot and carefully removed it. This needs to be wrapped, and you need to stay off it as much as possible. As he worked, Lillian studied him. In the firelight, she could see his features more clearly: strong jawline, straight nose, and eyes that seemed to reflect the stars above. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 years. "How did you get involved with Blackburn?" he asked, breaking the silence as he wrapped a strip of cloth around her swollen ankle. Lillian stiffened. "I worked at his hotel in Copper Creek, as a bookkeeper." "And you saw something you weren't supposed to see." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Ledgers. Proving he's been bribing officials, stealing from minors, and worse. When he found out I'd discovered them, She trailed off, the memories still too raw. "He tried to silence you," Isaac finished for her, his jaw tightening. "He killed my friend Martha when she helped me escape." Lillian's voice broke. She was just the cook's assistant. She didn't deserve to die. Isaac finished wrapping her ankle and sat back on his heels, looking up at her. "That's why you need to testify. Not just for yourself, but for Martha and everyone else Blackburn has hurt." "And what happens after?" "Blackburn has men everywhere. If he doesn't hang, I'll never be safe." "One problem at a time, Miss Hayes." He offered her a tin cup of coffee from the pot near the fire. "First, we get you to Silver Creek for the trial. Judge Wilson is honest, and the federal marshals will be there. And you, what's your role in all this?" Isaac's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Just a hired gun on the right side for once." Something about his candor made her trust him a little more. "How long until we reach Silver Creek?" 4 days if we push hard, 5 if we need to be cautious." He poked at the fire. "Which, given Blackburn's resources, we do." Lillian sipped her coffee, the bitter warmth a small comfort. "And my mare? I'll fetch her at first light. If she can't travel, I'll make arrangements for her care before we continue." Gratitude warmed her chest. "Thank you." As promised, Isaac rose before dawn and returned with her mare, who was still limping but able to walk. He fashioned a makeshift splint for the horse's leg and loaded their minimal supplies. "We'll need to travel light and quiet," he explained. "I know some trails Blackburn's men won't. It'll take longer, but it's safer." For 3 days they traveled through landscapes that took Lillian's breath away: towering mesas, hidden valleys, and forests that seemed untouched by human hands. Isaac proved to be a skilled guide, finding water and game when needed, always alert for signs of pursuit. At night, they camped in hidden spots, keeping their fire small. Isaac insisted on taking most of the watch, allowing Lillian to rest. They talked during these quiet moments not about Blackburn or the trial, but about simpler things. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about his father teaching him to track and shoot, about his mother's death from fever when he was 15. In turn, Lillian shared her own story: being orphaned at 12, taken in by an aunt who taught her bookkeeping, striking out on her own at 18 to find work out west where women with skills could demand better pay. On the 4th night, as they sat beside their small fire deep in a canyon that Isaac claimed few white men knew about, Lillian found herself studying him again. There was a gentleness to him that belied his capable exterior. His hands, strong enough to break a man's neck, were tender when treating her injured ankle or stroking his horse's muzzle. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked suddenly. Isaac looked up from cleaning his revolver, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "I told you. Judge Wilson hired me." "No." Lillian shook her head. "There's more to it. I can tell." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he set his gun aside and met her gaze. 2 years ago, my sister witnessed a murder in Durango. The killer was the mayor's son. When she agreed to testify, he swallowed hard. Nobody protected her. They found her body in the river a week before the trial. Lillian's hand flew to her mouth. Isaac, I'm so sorry. I couldn't save her. His voice was rough with emotion. But I can try to save you. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and something electric passed between them, a connection forged in shared pain and unexpected understanding. The next morning, they set out earlier than usual, both of them quieter after the previous night's revelations. Around midday, they crested a hill to find a wide valley spread before them, with a river cutting through its heart and a town visible in the distance. Silver Creek, Isaac announced, pointing to the cluster of buildings. We should reach it by nightfall. Relief flooded through Lillian, but it was tinged with an odd sense of regret. These days with Isaac, despite the constant threat hanging over them, had awakened something in her, a feeling of possibility she hadn't experienced in a long time. They were halfway down the hill when Isaac suddenly reined in his horse, his body tensing. "What is it?" Lillian asked, immediately alert. "Riders," he said, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance, moving along the river toward the town. "Too many to be a regular patrol." Lillian felt her heart sink. Blackburn? Possibly. Isaac scanned the landscape, quickly assessing their options. "We need to change course. There's another way into town, through that ravine to the east, but it'll take us past nightfall to arrive." As they veered toward the ravine, Lillian could feel the tension radiating from Isaac. "What if they're waiting for us in town?" she asked. "Judge Wilson wasn't expecting us until tomorrow at the earliest. I sent word ahead with a trapper we met 2 days ago, but I'm not sure if he's reached the town yet." Isaac's expression was grim. "We'll have to be careful. Approach after dark and find the marshal before anyone realizes you're there." The narrow ravine forced them to ride single file, with Isaac leading and Lillian following on her mare, who had recovered enough to carry her at a slow pace. The walls rose steep on either side, casting long shadows as the sun began to set. They were nearing the end of the ravine when the sound of a rifle being cocked echoed off the stone walls. "That's far enough," a voice called from above. Isaac immediately pulled his horse to a stop, his hand moving toward his gun, but freezing when 3 men appeared on the rim of the ravine, rifles aimed down at them. "Isaac Kane," one of the men called. "Mr. Blackburn sends his regards." Lillian felt her blood turn to ice. They had been betrayed. "You've got no quarrel with the lady," Isaac said calmly, though Lillian could hear the tension in his voice. "Let her go, and I won't make trouble." The man laughed. "That's not how this works. Blackburn wants both of you silenced." "How did you find us?" Isaac demanded, clearly trying to buy time as his eyes scanned for an escape route. "Money talks, Kane, even to trappers." The realization hit Lillian like a physical blow. The trapper Isaac had trusted with their message had sold them out. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and sound. Isaac suddenly kicked his horse forward, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion and firing up at the men on the ridge. At the same moment, he reached back and slapped Lillian's mare on the rump, sending her galloping ahead. Gunshots echoed through the ravine. Lillian clung to her horse's mane as they burst out of the narrow passage into open land. Behind her, she heard more shots, and a shout of pain that might have been Isaac's. Tears streaming down her face, she urged her mare on, torn between fleeing to safety and turning back to help the man who had risked everything to protect her. The decision was made for her when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from behind. "Lillian, keep going," Isaac's voice called. She risked a glance back and saw him galloping after her, his hat gone and blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, but very much alive. Behind him, the ravine remained empty, at least for the moment. They rode hard for the next hour, taking a circuitous route toward Silver Creek, using the growing darkness as cover. When they finally stopped to rest the horses in a dense stand of trees, Lillian immediately went to Isaac, her hands shaking as she examined his wound. "It's nothing," he insisted, though he winced when she dabbed at the blood with her handkerchief. "Bullet grazed me, that's all." "What happened to the men?" "I got one. The others ducked for cover, which gave me time to get away." He took her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "Lillian, listen to me. The trapper's betrayal means Blackburn knows we're coming. Silver Creek might not be safe. But the trial is still scheduled for tomorrow." His eyes searched hers. "But we need a new plan to get you there safely." As they sat in the darkness, the distant lights of Silver Creek twinkling like earthbound stars, Isaac outlined his strategy. They would separate. He would enter town openly, drawing attention, while she would wait until an hour before dawn and approach from the west, where the marshal's office was located. "I don't like leaving you alone," he said, his concern evident. "I'll be fine," she assured him, though her stomach twisted with fear. "I've made it this far." Isaac hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small piece of paper. "Here's a map to a cabin about 5 miles north of town. If anything goes wrong, if you arrive and sense a trap ride there immediately. It belongs to an old friend who owes me a favor." Lillian took the map, her fingers brushing his, sending that now familiar spark through her. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his cheek. "For luck," she whispered. In the darkness, she couldn't see him blush, but she felt his hand come up to touch her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek with heart-stopping tenderness. "Be careful," he murmured, his voice husky. "I couldn't bear to lose you, too." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. Then Isaac stood, helping her to her feet, and the moment passed. True to his word, Isaac rode openly into Silver Creek, creating a distraction that allowed Lillian to approach the marshal's office undetected in the pre-dawn hours. Marshal Bennett, a grizzled veteran with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner, had been forewarned by Isaac and quickly ushered her inside. "Kane's a good man," the marshal said as he locked the door behind them. "He's stirred up quite a hornet's nest at the saloon, making sure everyone knows he's in town." "Is he safe?" Lillian asked anxiously. "Safe enough for now. Judge Wilson's already here, and the federal marshals arrived yesterday." Bennett poured her a cup of coffee. "The trial's set for 10 o'clock. Until then, you'll stay here where I can keep an eye on you." As the sun rose over Silver Creek, the town began to buzz with activity. Word had spread about the trial, and curious onlookers gathered outside the courthouse. Through the marshal's office window, Lillian could see men taking up positions around the square. Some wore badges, but others were clearly Blackburn's men, recognizable by their fine clothes and watchful eyes. At 9:30, Marshal Bennett escorted Lillian to the courthouse through a back entrance, flanked by 2 federal marshals. Inside, the courtroom was packed, the air heavy with tension and the mingled scents of tobacco, sweat, and dust. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with piercing blue eyes, nodded to Lillian as she entered. In the front row sat Robert Blackburn himself, a handsome, silver-haired man whose refined appearance belied his cruel nature. He smiled coldly as she took her seat near the judge's bench. Lillian's hands trembled as she was sworn in. Her eyes searched the crowded room for Isaac but couldn't find him. Had something happened? Had her distraction cost him his life? She forced herself to focus on the questions, recounting in detail the evidence she had discovered in Blackburn's ledgers, the bribes, the extortion, the funds diverted from legitimate businesses. She described how Martha had helped her escape with copies of the most damning pages, and how Blackburn's men had caught them at the edge of town. "She told me to run," Lillian said, her voice breaking. The last thing I saw was one of Blackburn's men raising his gun. I heard the shot as I rode away. Throughout her testimony, Blackburn's expression never changed, that same cold, confident smile, as if he knew something no one else did. It wasn't until the judge asked if he had anything to say in his defense that Blackburn finally stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "Miss Hayes is clearly confused. The ledgers she claims to have seen were falsified by my former business partner, who has already confessed to embezzlement. As for the unfortunate death of the kitchen girl, that was a tragic accident during a legitimate pursuit of a thief, namely, Miss Hayes herself." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Lillian felt her heart sink. Without the actual ledgers, which she had lost during her desperate flight, it was her word against Blackburn's. Judge Wilson frowned. "Do you have evidence to support these claims, Mr. Blackburn?" "Indeed I do, Your Honor." Blackburn gestured to one of his men, who approached with a document. "A signed confession from my former partner, and witness statements regarding the accident." Lillian felt the room spin around her. It had all been for nothing. Martha had died for nothing. And now, when Blackburn walked free, she would be next. The courtroom doors suddenly burst open, and Isaac strode in, his face grim but determined. Behind him came 3 men Lillian recognized as Blackburn's associates from Copper Creek, their hands bound and their expressions defeated. "Your Honor," Isaac called, "I have evidence that contradicts Mr. Blackburn's claims." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Judge Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "Approach, Mr. Kane," he commanded. Isaac walked forward, placing a leather-bound ledger on the judge's bench. "The original ledger Miss Hayes referenced, Your Honor. I recovered it from Mr. Blackburn's safe in Copper Creek last night, with the help of these gentlemen who have agreed to testify against their employer in exchange for leniency." Blackburn's face contorted with rage. "This is preposterous. Those men are not authorized to—" "Furthermore," Isaac continued, cutting him off, "I have here a sworn statement from the town doctor in Copper Creek, who treated Martha Williams before she died. She lived long enough to identify her shooter as Mr. Blackburn himself." The testimony that followed was damning. Blackburn's associates, facing their own charges and seeing their employer's empire crumbling, revealed details of his criminal activities that even Lillian hadn't known about. By the time the judge called for a recess to review the evidence, Robert Blackburn's confident smile had vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. As the courtroom emptied, Lillian finally caught Isaac's eye. The relief and admiration in her gaze made him stand a little straighter despite his obvious exhaustion. "How did you manage it?" she asked when they had a moment alone, guarded by the marshals. "I rode back to Copper Creek after I created the distraction here," he explained. "I had a suspicion about where Blackburn would keep the original ledgers, too valuable to destroy, but too dangerous to leave unprotected. His former associates were already worried about their own fates, and didn't take much convincing to turn on him." "You could have been killed," she said, her voice soft with concern. Isaac's eyes held hers. "Some things are worth the risk." The trial resumed the next morning, and by noon, Judge Wilson had rendered his verdict, guilty on all counts. Robert Blackburn was sentenced to hang, his associates to various prison terms based on their level of cooperation. As Blackburn was led away in chains, he stopped beside Lillian and Isaac. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I still have friends. Powerful friends who won't risk their own necks for yours," Isaac interrupted, stepping protectively closer to Lillian. "It's over, Blackburn. You've lost." Outside the courthouse, the autumn sun bathed Silver Creek in golden light. Lillian stood on the steps, suddenly uncertain about what came next. The danger was past, her testimony given. She was free to go wherever she wanted, as Isaac had promised when they first met. "What will you do now?" Isaac asked, as if reading her thoughts. Lillian looked out at the bustling town, then back at the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. I don't know. I haven't really thought beyond surviving to testify. Isaac shifted, uncharacteristically hesitant. I've been thinking about heading up to Wyoming territory. There's good land there, I hear. A man could start a ranch, build something permanent. Wyoming is very far north, Lillian observed, her heart beating faster. Cold winters. Yes, but beautiful country. He met her eyes. Too much for one person to manage alone, though. Lillian felt a smile tugging at her lips. Are you asking me something, Mr. Kane? Isaac took off his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture she now recognized as one of his few tells of nervousness. I know it hasn't been long, and God knows you deserve better than a rough cowboy with little to his name, but... He took a deep breath. I've never met anyone like you, Lillian Hayes. Your courage, your determination, your heart. If you'd consider giving me a chance to prove myself worthy of you, I'd spend every day trying. Lillian's vision blurred with unexpected tears. She reached out, stilling his restless hands with her own. I've never felt safer than I did with you, even when we were being hunted. I've never felt more seen. Her voice softened. I've never felt more loved, though neither of us has said the word. Hope dawned in Isaac's eyes. Is that a yes? It's, I want to see Wyoming, she answered with a smile. And it's I want to see it with you. 3 weeks later, as the first snow dusted the peaks of the Grand Tetons, Isaac and Lillian Kane stood on the porch of their newly constructed cabin, surveying the land that would become their ranch. They had been married by a traveling preacher in a small ceremony witnessed by the handful of neighbors scattered across the valley. No regrets? Isaac asked, his arm around her waist. Lillian leaned into his embrace, watching as their horses, including her faithful mare, now fully recovered, grazed peacefully in the meadow. None, she assured him. You're not still running? He teased gently, echoing his words from that first meeting. Lillian turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. No, she whispered against his lips. I'm finally home. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Isaac would always begin the story the same way. Your mama fell from her horse running from fear, and I told her she didn't have to run anymore. And Lillian would always finish it. And that was the moment I started running toward love instead. In the harsh but beautiful wilderness of Wyoming territory, they built not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love that began with a desperate flight and ended with the courage to stand still and open their hearts to each other. Their story, whispered around campfires and family gatherings for generations, became a testament to the truth that sometimes the bravest thing isn't running from danger. It's allowing yourself to believe in safety, in love, and in the promise of tomorrow.